Since the launch of Monster Hunter World, I've been making build videos to help hunters take on the challenging hunts in the game. But now the best of the best builds are done, things don't feel as challenging anymore. So with that, I present to you the Budget Build Challenge. For this video, we'll be looking at a budget build for the longsword. Now what is the Budget Build Challenge? Well, it's where we take a basic endgame vanilla budget build and test it against some of the hardest hunts in the game and see how it performs. Of course, there are some self-imposed rules for this budget build challenge. So firstly, the builds in question can only use weapons and armor below the rank of Gigante and only from the base version of Monster Hunter World Iceborne. So, whilst the likes of Gold Rathian and Brute Tigrex are okay, any armor from monsters added to the game post-launch, so Rajang, Frostfang Barrier, Phalatrion, so on and so forth, their armor and weaponry are not allowed. The next rule is that the builds cannot contain any tier 4 decorations, so no decorations that have 2 skills on them. They only can contain decorations that are easily farmable from high rank. And then lastly, these challenges will feature 3 hunts, one of them against Tempered Gigante via the Ode to Destruction quest. The next will be against one of the normal monsters that were added to the game post-launch, so Rajang, Frostfang Barrier, so on and so forth. And then finally, the last hunt will be against either Fatalis or Latrion, depending on the build in question. So, with the rules in place, let's get into this. The longsword is a very good weapon in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Thanks to the introduction of the various counter mechanics as well as the special sheath, it's able to forego defensive skills in favour of just focusing on offense if a player is skilled enough. Countering monsters correctly also allows you to continue your assault uninterrupted. But that doesn't always work out, sometimes you're unlucky, sometimes the monster doesn't move as you intended, and you can end up getting hit. As a result, the budget build I'm using in question mainly does focus on offense, but it has a few insurance skills added to the build. I will also say that I had 2 budget builds in mind for this budget build challenge when it came to the longsword, one utilising the Frostcraft set bonus found on the Velkhana armor, and one a more general DPS build. The way I play the longsword is more of a constant offense, which favours the general DPS build, whilst the Frostcraft build relies on you sheathing your weapon a lot more via the special sheath and performing counters correctly. You're kind of reacting to a monster rather than a continuous assault. Like I said, the way I play the longsword favours the more constant assault method, which is reflected in the build I'll be showing here. So, first of all, when it comes to the armor, you're going to need the Kaiser Crown Alpha, you'll then need the Rex Royal Mail Alpha, Kaiser Vambraces Alpha, Kaiser Coil Beta, and the Garuga Greaves Beta. I'm also using a Challenger Charm 5. Remember, depending where you are in the game, this may only be a Challenger Charm 4, but regardless, it shouldn't make too much of a difference. And when it comes to the weapon, we're using the Wyvern Blade Luna. This is the Gold Rathian Longsword. This has an affinity increase augmentation, health regen augmentation, and then an augmentation of your choice, to which I've gone for a defense increase augmentation. As for the mantles, I've gone for Rocksteady and Temporal mantles, as we will be trying this build against Fatalis. So when it comes to the decorations, you've got a few to play around with. So firstly, I've gone for Critical Jaws to max out crit boost. I've then gone for an Attack Jaw to get attack boost to level 4. I've then gone for Vitality Jaws for health boost, and then you'll have some option jaws to play around with, to which I've gone for Protection Jaws to max out Divine Blessing. This, to be honest, isn't needed if you're a master with the longsword, but I wanted some extra insurance, as although I feel I'm adequate enough with the longsword, I do get hit from time to time. And then finally, for the decorations on your mantles, I've gone for Heavy Artillery Jaws for the Heavy Artillery skill, because we will be going up against Fatalis. So if you've done what I've done here, you have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have a raw attack of 1046 with white sharpness. You have 45% base affinity, which can easily be 100% when you take into account both weakness exploits and the latent power buff. And you have a poison rating of 420. You'll also have a decent defense of 1028 that is strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. Now, when it comes to the skills, first of all, you have Agitator at level 5. Agitator is a skill that, when a monster becomes enraged, it will grant us increased raw attack as well as affinity. And as you can easily control when a monster becomes enraged in Monster Hunter World Iceborne thanks to the whole flint shot mechanic, this buff can help increase our overall DPS and ensure that we get that 100% affinity as well. You also have Attack Boost at level 4, which increases the raw attack of a build, and at level 4 or above, it also grants us a bonus 5% extra base affinity. You have Critical Eye at level 4. Critical Eye is a skill that increases the base affinity of a build. You have Health Boost at level 3, which allows our maximum health to get to that potential 200. You have Critical Boost at level 3, which is a skill whenever we crit a monster with our attacks, that attack will deal increased damage. However, the increased damage is only applied to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or element portion. Nonetheless, this is a raw attack focused build, so critical boost will be useful. You also have weakness exploit at level 3, which is a skill that gives us increased affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through clutch claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us 50% extra affinity overall. You also have Divine Blessing at level 3, which is a result of the protection jewels we're using. Divine Blessing gives us a chance at taking reduced damage should we take a hit from a monster. As I said at the start of the video though, if you're a master with the longsword, you don't really need this if you can successfully counter every monster attack, but that's easier said than done, and because I want this build to be a little bit of a comfortable build, I've added Divine Blessing. You also have Blast Attack at level 2, a byproduct of the armor. This would normally increase the effectiveness of blast weapons, but unfortunately we're not using a blast weapon, so this is wasted on this build unfortunately. You also have Latent Power at level 2, which is a buff that kicks in whenever we've been fighting a monster for a set amount of time or we've taken a set amount of damage from a monster. When this happens, Latent Power kicks in, granting us increased affinity as well as reduced stamina consumption. You also have Heat Guard at level 1, another byproduct of the armor we're wearing, but prevents damage from incredibly hot environments like the lava zones in the Elder's Recess. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Heavy Artillery level 2. Which allows the cannons and ballistas we use to deal increased damage. As with all these builds, heavy artillery is being used primarily to take on Fatalis. Finally, when it comes to the set bonuses, you only have one of them, which is the Teostra's technique, Master's Touch, which prevents any sharpness loss on our weapon when we crit a monster. And as we already have a very high affinity, potentially 100%, it means we should see minimum sharpness loss on this build. To be honest, when I was constructing the budget build for this challenge with the longsword, it was a toss-up between the Master's Touch and the Frostcraft set bonuses, but given the way I play, combined with the fact that when I do sheathe my weapon it's not sheathed for long at all, Master's Touch was better for my playstyle. I did try the Frostcraft build, but because when I went for the special sheath I would rarely keep the special sheath active long enough for the Frostcraft buff to recharge itself effectively, I instead went for the Master's Touch build here. But regardless of which budget build you want to use, they are both strong, and this one is definitely capable of taking on pretty much anything in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. But every build out there has pros and cons. The biggest pro for this build is its strong damage output. Thanks to its raw attack combined with affinity based skills, it is able to take on pretty much any monster in the game quite quickly. On top of that, this build has minimum sharpness issues. Thanks to Master's Touch as well as the high affinity, it means rarely will you have to stop and sharpen your weapon. And then finally, the last pro is that this build does have some backup defensive options in the form of health boost and Divine Blessing should you mess up your counter and you get hit. But unfortunately there are cons as well. The biggest cons include the fact that there are no evasion skills, so there's no evade window or anything like that, but mind you, like I said, if you are countering attacks correctly you shouldn't really need it. And the other con is, for a budget build, this is a borderline budget build. It could be considered quite hard to craft in some respect, especially as it does have gold Rathian materials as well as brute Tigrex materials. Still, the build falls within the rules of this challenge, so it's still acceptable. But with that all said and done, let's move on to the actual challenge and see how this build performed. First up was Tempered Ruin and Gigante via the Ode to Destruction event quest. Now this quest actually proved a little bit tricky, but I think that was down to my own personal playstyle. Tempered Ruin and Gigante is quite a fast monster, and jumping into the hunt, not having used the longsword for a little while, I was a little bit rusty to say the least. I was also overconfident with my ability to counter every move that Ruin and Gigante would perform, and thus I got hit a lot more than I anticipated. I soon, however, switched my playstyle over, going back into my full onslaught mode rather than waiting to counter Tempered Ruin and Gigante. That way, I was able to easily break Ruin and Gigante's spikes multiple times, knocking it over, crowd controlling it, and eventually doing the hunt with little difficulty. Which brings us on to the next challenge, which was against Tempered Stigensenoga. Again, Tempered Stigensenoga is a cross between a fast moving monster and one that utilises the dragon element. And whilst getting affected with Dragon Blight isn't too much of an issue with this build, as we are focusing on raw attack more than the poison element. Mind you, the poison rating on the weapon we're using is actually quite high, so being able to poison a monster is very useful. And it's one of the bonuses as well, a pro so to speak that I didn't mention in the pros and cons section, which that this build can be used against pretty much any monster, as rarely is a monster completely immune to poison. So when it came to Stigensenoga, this build performed adequately well. Again, I wasn't really focusing on trying to counter every single move that Stigensenoga performed. Instead, I would just continue my onslaught, focusing more on foresight slashes to counter the monster's attack rather than the EI special slash. I will say against Stigensenoga, I did miss quick sheath a little bit, but it's not an essential skill for the longsword. Yes, it does help when it comes to performing the special sheath, and is definitely useful if you're using the Frostcraft build and going for those counters all the time, but even without that, this build was able to take down Stigensenoga. Which brings us to the third and final hunt, which was against the Black Dragon Fatalis. Now ironically, this build performed incredibly well against the Black Dragon. It was easily able to break its horns during the second phase of this hunt, but I think that is mainly thanks to the Spirit Helmbreaker being able to reach the horns with a little luck. Of course, I utilised the mantles with heavy artillery to stun Fatalis multiple times, as well as deal that additional artillery damage, which helped out in the overall hunt. And despite a few feints, I was comfortable using this build against Fatalis. Again, like I've been saying though during this entire video, I was favouring my constant assault playstyle rather than going for those counters, as if you mistime a counter attack, an EI spirit slash, foresight slash whatever, when you're fighting Fatalis, you're going to feel it. So eliminating that risk, foregoing those counters only for easy counters, was best for me and resulted in the build being able to take down the monster. So there we have it. That was the budget build challenge using the longsword. Hopefully it showed you that limited builds can still do tough hunts in the game. Also, I'm sure that the builds could be adapted and changed to make certain monsters and hunts less difficult, so adapt the builds as you see fit. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you the budget build challenge in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.